guys, welcome. This is Tidarian, and always, if you enjoy the video you're about to see, please give a thumbs up and subscribe for more great videos. Enjoy. Welcome. In today's video, we're going to be examining two specific concepts. First goal being reviewing different DMRs, taking a look at their specific stats and how they differ from one another, and coming up with logical recommendations for different gun and attachment combinations for different situations. The second, and in my mind, more important topic, is to discuss the stigma of DMRs and dispel some myths and rumors. We're actually going to start with point number 2 because I feel it's important to discuss DMR's role in general and talk about their uses before getting into specific scenarios. DMRs, or designated marksman rifles, are a very common use weapon in real-life military units, especially special force units. They fill the gap between fully automatic weapons and bolt-action rifles, allowing more mobility and a higher rate of fire than a common sniper rifle, while sacrificing the automatic capabilities of assault rifles to allow greater accuracy at longer distances. Their role in Battlefield 4 is no different whatsoever. The too-long different read version of this is they're not the best weapons in extreme close quarters or at extremely long distances, but anywhere in between those two, they're a beast. However, DMRs have gained a reputation as being bad or being noob guns for reasons that are, as I'll demonstrate in a moment, completely ludicrous. In fact, I've seen people on Reddit or even famous YouTubers such as LevelCap saying these things, and you can even find those willing to go an extra step and claim that they're both bad guns and a noob gun in the same sentence. And here I was believing a noob gun was generally one whose skill ceiling was so low that it attracted noobs. I don't think a gun can, by generally accepted definitions, be both at the same time. So where do these claims come from? Well, the most common thing I hear is that they're spam weapons. First, I'd like to say that I find anyone saying this while also using an automatic weapon hypocritical, and the accusation is a bit ironic to begin with. See, every full automatic weapon in Battlefield 4 has at least 2 fire modes, single and full auto. You don't even have to necessarily change fire modes to pop off single shots, so you're pretty free to handle it however you want. A DMR has exactly one single shot / semi-automatic. So there's 2 observations to be made here. First, no one really decries someone holding down mouse 1 while using a full auto like they do a DMR user firing quickly. And yet, regardless of which automatic weapon we're talking about, or which DMR we're talking about, and regardless of how fast a DMR user is clicking their mouse, they will never be able to fire as fast as any automatic weapon, ever. So who's really spamming here? That's not even mentioning the fact that the accuracy of a DMR goes out the window as its full theoretical max RPM is reached, and a lot of automatics are very controllable even when they're firing fully automatically. Secondly, and we're about to really examine this point, but DMRs, no matter how fast they're fired, have the worst time to kill in the game. Let's examine the MK11 Mod 0 and the AEK 971. Right away, it's very apparent that at any distance, the AEK has a major time to kill advantage over the MK11, on hardcore or softcore. That's not to say that this theoretical examination is applicable at any range, but this time to kill comparison is very important. Next, we examine the weapon properties of the two guns. The MK11 certainly has an aim-down sight advantage, but as for the spam theory, I'd like to point out some very glaring advantages in the AEK's favor. First of all, and while this is absolutely horrible design on DICE's part, it is the way the game works. AEK has less spread than the MK11. That means as the 2 weapons are fired simultaneously, the full auto weapon will quickly become more accurate than the semi-auto. That's pretty ridiculous. Not only that, when you examine the recoil differences, once you're able to account for the first shot recoil of the AEK, you're actually looking at a much more controllable recoil pattern as it has a fraction of the DMR's recoil modifier. It's also worth mentioning that despite having all its other advantages already, the muzzle velocity on the AEK is very respectable. But you might be saying, okay, maybe I have a specific example that shows what I'm trying to talk about and ignore examples that don't. Okay, so let's take another example. Let's take a more middle-of-the-road assault rifle. Let's do the MK11 versus the ACE-23, which is one of the more popular AR choices. But even here you see that even with a much slower fire rate, the ACE-23 has a distinct time to kill advantage in both hardcore and softcore, and has a fraction of the recoil and spread increase. Except this time, the muzzle velocities are almost identical, and the ACE-23 has almost double the magazine capacity, with only a slightly longer partial reload speed. Okay, so maybe I'm focusing on assault rifles. Surely we'll see something else in a different weapon category. Maybe a PDW. Well, nope. It looks like just about any weapon can kill faster than DMR. The differences between time to kill, the recoil, the spread increase, similar across. DMRs, on paper at least, seem to be at a disadvantage. So why use them at all? At this point, we've pretty much dispelled the noob gun theory with cold hard numbers, but what about them being bad? Well, if you take a look at my battle log profile, you'll see an awful lot of DMR usage. In fact, the MK11 Mod 0 is my most used gun by a large margin. So am I just a masochist who doesn't feel the rush of the battlefield if I haven't handicapped myself? Hardly. The DMR has a couple of aces in the hole that make it an attractive choice on a wide variety of maps, provided that you use it correctly. First of all, while the gun is not capable of matching the firing rate or theoretical time to kill of any automatic weapon in the game, it does have one very distinct advantage. Assuming you're playing normal mode, not hardcore, with any given DMR, you only need 3 hits to kill anyone, anywhere, from any distance. That's 3 hits to any part of the body at any distance. I say that with a very slight caveat because at distances beyond the drop-off end, if you get unlucky enough to have all 3 hits be limb hits, they will barely survive it due to the limb damage multiplier penalty. But that is very rare. Maybe happen 10 to 15 times in over 5,000 kills with the MK11. 99% of the time, it's a 3-hit kill anywhere. If you get a headshot, you only need 1 additional hit anywhere. Now, as the time to kill statistics suggest, that's not an advantage over faster firing guns in close quarters. Not that I don't win close quarters fights with the DMR ever, but the odds are against an equally skilled player in close quarters that they'll be able to land all the shots they need to kill you before you can do the same to them. But, as I indicated earlier, this advantage disappears in mid-range fighting. Why? Well, several reasons. First of all, while you have worse recoil with the DMR and can't fire as fast anyway, you can fire more accurately. As distance increases, the difference in aim-down sight accuracy gets better and better for the more accurate gun. That is to say, the accuracy advantage of DMRs gets more prevalent as engagement distance increases. Secondly, you only need to land 3 bullets at any distance. The number of bullets needed to kill with an automatic goes up drastically over distance. Yours does not. Looking at the Groza 4 comparison again, you can see that at a max distance, they need a whopping 7 bullets to bring you down, and you still only need 3. That's almost double the 4 they needed at close quarters, and they're much less capable of hitting you to begin with. The last reason is muzzle velocity. Simply put, bullet drop and leading is much easier with the faster muzzle velocity, which the DMR has a variable advantage in. Compared with some guns, it's merely good, and with others, it's quite extreme. In summary, starting around 50 to 60 meters, where most automatic guns drop off, you start being forced to contend with. Your gun has a fraction of their gun's bullets needed to kill, and you can fire them more accurately. Does that mean you'll never lose an engagement at these ranges? Of course not. You still have to fire accurately. Them firing accurately in return can turn the tides. Accuracy is the great equalizer when it comes to DMRs, and of course suppression can play a tricky role in these situations. But as you'll see in the footage playing behind me here, when you pick your battles wisely, the DMR is a force to be reckoned with in the hands of someone who knows how to use it properly. So what is the role of a DMR user? Well, thankfully for me, that role is very fluid in Battlefield 4. In Battlefield 3, they were a recon-only weapon, but now they've been added to the list of all-kit weapons. Now, a lot of people think this is a bad idea, whereas personally, I think they're pretty much the only interesting all-kit weapons that exist, though I do have a soft spot in my heart for shotguns. But besides, since people seem to think that they're kind of shitty in the first place, I can't imagine why they'd care all that much. Nevertheless, as should be obvious by now, for the most part you should think twice before taking a DMR into a map like Lockers or Metro. They simply lose their dominant edge in maps with all close quarters engagements. However, there are very few outside those that don't lend themselves to being good for DMRs. Personally, I love Wavebreaker, Heinen Resort, Propaganda Flood Zone, and many others. All of them work well with DMRs if you pick your engagements. Now that is the tricky thing about DMRs. You have to be more selective in how you pick your battles. Not that that's not true of any weapons, but it's more so with the DMR. Now, DMRs don't really fall into the non-PTFO nature of a sniper rifle, but you don't want to be the first person charging into a point or a building, if at all possible. They work wonders as squad weapons, with you providing overwatch while your squad or teammates move in first. If the enemy is focused on them and reveals themselves, then you can provide devastatingly effective cover fire from a safe distance without the need to hit them first or to get away like you would run into with a bolt-action rifle. Nor is that to be taken as an endorsement for not getting your hands dirty, but the simple fact is you don't have to charge in recklessly, regardless of the situation, to be an effective team player. Hanging back 40 to 50 meters and killing 4 enemies that are firing on your squad mates is a much better contribution than running in, hip-firing wildly, and getting yourself killed. As far as which classes I use the DMR with, the answer is basically anything but recon, but usually assault or engineer. Now, if the map is more vehicle-centric, usually an engineer, because I don't want to be defenseless against them, but if there are few enough of them, or the vehicles and the engineers on my team are keeping them in check, I usually like to provide healing and revives for my teammates as an assault player. Support works too, and since DMR has a somewhat limited ammo supply, it tends to work well. But I will say that if I'm using a support, I'm almost always using a DMR. At the same time, I try to play something else other than support almost all the time. Recon, if I'm using it, I'm almost always using a bolt-action rifle and try not to put myself in situations where a DMR would be appropriate to begin with. So, we've talked about DMR ethics, so to speak, and some general ideas, but which guns are bad, or which guns are good, and which ones should we be using when? So here I've created a half-assed spreadsheet of all DMRs and their stats on Synthic for our purposes. Like every other weapon class, DMRs can essentially be split into two groups, fast firing and slow firing, though there are two major differences when examining variations in DMRs. First of all, unlike any other weapon class, the damage models for all DMRs is effectively identical. Yes, I see that damage varies on a couple of them, but when you do the math, other than the long-range all-limbs hit situation that I chronicled earlier, they're all 3 hit kills at any range, and none of them are less than 2 hit kills without headshots. In fact, I'm really not sure why they bothered to vary the damage at all. I have no idea. Secondly, under no circumstance other than the oh shit face-to-face spray and pray type moments should you ever be attempting to fire a DMR as fast as it will fire. So the difference in rounds per minute is fairly negligible as well. Doing that, firing as fast as you can, will cause a spread increase that really curses these guns to eat you alive. You will have to find the sweet spot between fire rate and spread increase to ensure optimal accuracy. And at the right ranges and proper timing, you can essentially have all 3 killing bullets in the air before the first one even hits the target. They don't have any time to run at all. If you look, I've compared these weapons all with a heavy barrel and an angled foregrip. Now, my usage of DMRs is about a 90-10 split between heavy barrel and suppressor, with the suppressor being used mainly on night times of VOD and a couple of other maps where staying off the minimap and not quite close quarters situations can help me stay alive longer. That being said, after the recent DMR nerf to aim down sight accuracy, a heavy barrel is pretty much your best friend, and the angle foregrip almost totally negates the recoil penalty for using that. So, a case could be made for using a different grip barrel attachment in close quarters and probably with something like an SKS or an M39, but I generally don't opt for that kind of loadout. So keeping in mind that bullets to kill is identical across the board, which of these weapons stand out? As I said earlier, the MK11 is my weapon of choice when it comes to DMRs, and not without reason, but I have quite a bit of experience with most of them, and there are a lot of good choices. The 3 that I'd most readily point you towards are the ACE-53 SV, the MK11 Mod 0, and the SCAR H SV. Now, you'll notice all 3 of these are slower firing, have larger magazines than most, and with the exception of the ACE-53, have higher muzzle velocities than most. One of the primary reasons I use the MK11, other than the fact that it's just badass, and is what our U.S. forces use, generally speaking, is that the MK11 has the best aim-down sight accuracy of all the DMRs. Not a huge advantage over some of them, but when you're shooting at targets past 100 meters, you will notice a difference pretty quickly. Also, at a muzzle velocity of 640, it's only surpassed by the M39 and the QBU, each of which has significant disadvantages of their own. Now, the SCAR H SV is almost identical to the MK. It has slightly less accuracy, slightly slower muzzle velocity, and on the other hand, it's a little less recoil and reload time, but these values are pretty close. You wouldn't experience much difference from one to the next. The ACE-53 is slightly worse in all these categories, except muzzle velocity, where it lags way behind, though it's not exactly slow, but boasts an impressive 26-round magazine, which is great. In other words, you might not hit with the first 3 bullets, but you've got 23 more to finish the job. It's a pretty nice weapon. Now, all that being said, I enjoy almost every DMR. The starting DMR, the RFB, was definitely good enough to get me interested in the weapon class. The M39 SKS, used skillfully, can be competent weapons in closer quarter engagements than I'd like to take an MK11 into. And the SVD-12, while worse in a lot of ways, is pretty iconic and still a competent weapon. I would, however, warn against the QBU-88. It looks great on paper. It does boast the fastest muzzle velocity and second lowest recoil and second highest RPM, but the magazine size is crippling. Even if you're hitting with most of your shots, it's easy to get overrun with only 11 rounds in the magazine, while all your other DMR brethren can keep on firing for another 5 to 15 bullets. Now let's talk about attachments. As I said earlier, the heavy barrel is pretty much the desired choice for the barrel attachment. Even without an angled grip to negate the extra recoil, the recoil isn't exactly unmanageable, but the increased accuracy is both noticeable and important, especially at longer ranges. As with most guns, the muzzle brake might seem nice at first, but it's especially bad with DMRs, where pinpoint accuracy is important and the muzzle brake sacrifices that accuracy. The compensator is a slightly better choice, but still increases the spread increase per shot, which is what we'd like to avoid. The flash hider has no downsides, and if you have nothing else, toss it on there, but there are better choices out there. Now, suppressors are odd with any gun, but particularly with DMRs, where you generally want to engage your targets at longer distances, where suppressors are weakest. The muzzle velocity penalty is felt pretty heavily with the DMR, and something they quite frankly need to change. But when you have the lowered muzzle velocity and the problem of not getting the much needed bonuses that the heavy barrel provides, it's a pretty dangerous trade-off. Then again, it keeps you off the minimap and makes you harder to locate by sound. So they are very useful situationally, but generally speaking, I'd stick with the heavy barrel. For the underbarrel attachment, angle grip is the alpha grip as far as I'm concerned. DMRs have heavy recoil, and this reduces that with no penalties. The stubby grip isn't a bad choice either, as it does decrease spread increase per shot, but I don't think it will provide a significant enough bonuses to allow you to fire that much faster and still maintain the same accuracy, whereas the recoil reduction for the angle grip is much more consistent. The vertical grip is not really useful except when you're on the move and hit firing, two things you kind of want to avoid with the DMR anyway. And bipods are very useless. There's no reason to post up with the DMR. You get no advantage, and it makes you very vulnerable. I mean, you do get a slight aim down sight accuracy advantage, but the stationary positioning is especially dangerous in the game. As far as scopes go, use whatever feels comfortable. Personally, I've become quite attached to the ACOG, though I have used the JGM extensively in the past. Unlike bolt-action rifles, none of the scopes will give off a scope glint, so you don't need to worry about that. You can use a lower magnification scope of your choice if you so desire, and when not using the ACOG, I'm generally rocking either the IRNV or the FLIR, both of which work awesome with DMRs. But for the most part, you want to capitalize on your range advantage with a 3 or 4x scope. Now, personally, I find the reticles of the JGM and ACOG superior because they're not very cluttered, but it comes down to personal preference for the most part. As far as accessories go, there aren't many good choices out there. The laser sights can make up-close moments a little more survivable, though hipfire with the DMR doesn't really pay off. That being said, it can counter IR scopes on other people's guns, so that is something to consider. The target designator used to be very good, but it's been nerfed pretty significantly. It might be situationally useful, but otherwise it's kind of dead weight. I'd stay away from flashlights as they really lose their effectiveness from farther away, and they will give your position away. Personally, I've started using the Candid iron sights a lot. Now, DICE should just quit being lazy and make a scope-mounted mini RDS like you see in real life, where it'd be mounted on top of the scope, or at least a Candid RDS like Hardline has. But when using IR, it's really nice to have an alternative that can't be countered with laser sight. So that's why I've chosen to go with that. Regardless, guys, if you haven't given DMRs a fair try, follow these guidelines and see what you can do with them. They're an awful lot of fun. Remember, proper usage equals proper positioning and vice versa. So pick your battles and dominate. I'll see you on the battlefield.